This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Gentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 262 of the GardenDC podcast. Are you tired of looking at the same old, boring, cookie-cutter landscapes? In this episode of GardenDC, we talk with David Marciniak of Revolutionary Gardens all about designing a garden for your personality. The plant profile is on Virginia Sweetspire, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on the Carrot Waltz by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by David Marciniak. He is the owner and lead designer with Revolutionary Gardens. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, thank you so much.
Great to have you on, Dave. And before we get into all things garden design and personalization, let's talk about baby Dave. Let's wind back the clock. And we like to ask our guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
Originally, no. So I actually got my start in the landscape industry when I was in high school working for my brother. He had a landscape company and I absolutely hated it and swore that I would do everything in my power to not have to do that ever again once I got out of college. And yeah, as it turned out, I got more and more into it and discovered that I actually really enjoyed being with plants and being outside and had kind of an aptitude for putting things together. And all of a sudden I flipped, 180 degrees from absolutely hating it, never wanting to do it again, to deciding that this is what I wanted to make my career.
And tell me about what you like about working with plants.
For me, so I studied interior design for a few years. And for me, I think the most exciting thing about designing with plants is that we're not just designing in a 3D space, but we're also designing for time. What we plant is not, what we put in right now is not what that's going to look like a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So it's picturing what that space can look like and is going to look like that I think is so much fun.
So true that garden design uses that fourth dimension of time, and that's such a big factor in a lot of gardening. People think, set it once and that's how it's always going to be, but that is not at all what happens in a landscape.
No, nature has a lot of other plans for whatever we think our best ideas are. So, that's been a big part of 30 years doing this, is figuring out what we can control and what we need to sort of let happen.
Tell me a little bit about Revolutionary Gardens and how you came up with the title.
So we do landscape design and landscape installation for customers all around Northern Virginia. The company name, actually, I agonized over a company name for about 3 or 4 years and finally realized that it was this great blend of both the fact that we're trying to do things that are a little bit different, a little bit more fun, and then also sort of playing off the history of the area, which was just, I'm in Culpeper, which, the Gadsden flag, the Don't Tread on Me flag, is what is, really recognized as part of the Revolutionary War. And so this has just been a great area for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so much of Northern Virginia history is also tied into the Civil War. We don't even think back sometimes all the way back to the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, I grew up in New England, so for us, history classes were Revolutionary War focused. So yeah, it was, a big part of growing up in Rhode Island.
And Culpeper, Virginia, can you describe it, especially for our listeners who are outside the Mid-Atlantic or Washington, D.C. area, kind of how it's situated as far as relation to major cities and maybe a little bit about the growing conditions there?
So geographically, we are almost halfway between DC and Charlottesville, right along Route 29. It is a terrific little community. I want to say probably around 20,000 people in the town. I live right in the town itself. County itself probably has about 36,000 people. Growing conditions here are really cool. So Culpeper is still in a large part a farming community, even though that is, unfortunately going away due to development pressures. So we've got a mix of soil here. Some of the places, like my backyard, is just phenomenal, where it has been farm over the years, really rich soil, great organic content. But then we also have other areas where the soil is just, mucky blackjack. So it's a little bit of a fun growing condition to try to know what you're dealing with. But there's a lot that we can grow here, which is really, really fortunate.
It's mainly Zone 7.
Correct, yes.
And, you're surrounded by farms and horse country too. And people always, I think, misinterpret, if they're not in the area, what Northern Virginia means. Because there's a whole part of Virginia that's north of me in Maryland and DC.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy because, my wife is a college professor and the state doesn't consider us Northern Virginia for cost of living reasons and stuff like that. But yeah, we functionally are. We're at this point a bedroom community for DC.
And what are you growing in your own home garden?
So in my front yard, I actually have a Japanese inspired planting for my front yard and all of that. My backyard has gotten a lot thinner on the ground because I have a really energetic 75-pound German short hair pointer that has decided that he likes chewing on anything and everything. So that is not my fun place. My fun place is actually at my shop, which is about 10 minutes from my house. We used the grant from the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, and we actually put in a conservation landscape garden all around my shop, which was just absolutely a blast to do.
And is that mainly native plants? What's that like?
Yeah, so that is exclusively native plants. That's what the state looks for. So what we did on that is to sort of mitigate runoff from the parking area and also create kind of a nestled in little patio for a teaching patio. We used a mix of native plants. We've got panicum, we've got aronia, we've got winterberry, we've got sweetbed magnolias, we've got inkberry holly. I mean, it's a really great demonstration garden of what you can do with native plants and have something that, still looks really nice and put together, which I think is a misconception people have about native plants, that you can't do that.
And I'm imagining you have a deer fence around all these goodies.
We do not. So, knock on wood, the deer. So, my shop is on 7 acres, but knock on wood, the deer stay on their own side of the train tracks. So, hopefully this winter it continues that way. This will be the first winter we've had the garden in place.
Well, I hope they do stay on their side of the tracks and don't venture too much over, or aren't too hungry that they decide that yours is looking pretty good.
Nope, absolutely.
So, for your clients, what type of landscapes are you designing for them? Do they mostly come to you looking for native installations? Is it a mini meadow? What specifically are you known for?
So, we do literally everything for the outside of the house. So that's honestly kind of what we're known for is, if somebody wants to do a Japanese style garden, we do a Japanese style garden. If somebody is looking for a native plant garden, we do that. Really, what we look for guidance from the customer is what kind of space do they want to create, and then what is it that excites them. One of the things that's been kind of neat about the shift in the trend towards native plants over the last, I've been in business since 2008. And just in that time, the shift that I've seen is more and more people are asking for them. So it's less of a fight to, get those into the landscape. And so we're having a lot of success doing native plant gardens for people, even ones who, wouldn't even know what a native plant was if it bit them when they first came to us. And then all of a sudden they're understanding, the value and what that can bring to the landscape.
And looking at your online portfolio, I noticed you have a lot of ponds and waterfalls and water features in your landscapes.
Yeah, we're one of the few companies that does those. Water features are tricky. There's a lot that goes into them. There's a lot that can go wrong. And so over the years, we've gotten pretty good with them.
So let's talk about the topic of the episode, which is, we can maybe describe it as avoiding the bland landscape, the cookie cutter one. So maybe we can define what a traditional, regular suburban landscape, when you hear that, what do you think of?
I mean, it's sort of your basic builder grade plantings. You've got your row of evergreens up against the house that are sheared into gumballs or boxes, and then you've got your pointy evergreen on the corner, and then you might have one tree out in the yard, and that's kind of your standard builder grade front yard. And the backyard is, at best maybe a patio or a deck, and then a few trees dotted out back. And that's, in a lot of cases when we start working with a customer, that's what we're presented with. That's what they have to start with.
And then it's all turf grass everywhere else, right?
Absolutely, wall to wall grass.
And for the selection of those evergreens and trees, it's usually maybe what's on sale or
So
available.
it kind of depends. It's when I first started, again, I started in 2008. So I started at the height of the recession with my business, which was a great time. And I did a lot of builder work. And, the builders are most concerned with what can they get inexpensively and as large as possible at that price. So, you end up with a lot of arborvitae, you end up with, some basic hollies. Japanese hollies, unfortunately, are something that a lot of the builders still use to this day, even though they die like it's their job. And it's, it's a pretty limited plant palette and nothing super, super exciting. I mean, luckily the builders have gotten away from Leyland cypress, so I'm thankful for that, but that's, pretty
Yeah.
basic palette.
And I think there has been some education. They're not using the Bradford pear anymore and some of the others that are, prone to quick failures.
Yeah, one of the things that's been interesting is, especially the communities closer into DC that we work in, like Arlington and Alexandria, they have a much more, it's not restrictive, but they definitely push homeowners to use native plantings if they're, for example, doing a tear down and putting a new house up. They really like to see them use native trees for the tree coverage, that sort of thing. And then plus, rain gardens, infiltration gardens, stuff like that. And so we're seeing builders spec more native plants. It's just they're not always what I would choose or put in the best location to make them happy and healthy.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of choices are done because obviously the lower maintenance possible. So maybe you wouldn't want to have like a native gumball tree versus a redbud in that spot.
No, exactly. And, the other thing too is just it comes down to who is specifying the plant. So in a lot of cases, if it's something where a civil engineer firm has to provide the plan and provide the tree coverage and everything else, you've got a civil engineer that's picking out the plants. And, nothing against civil engineers. They're incredibly valuable and I appreciate what they do on the engineering side. But in a lot of cases, they should not be picking plants.
Yeah, I think that, Dave, is a lot of the reputation of designers and landscape architects in particular is that they are great at designing, but they're not so good at the plant palette.
Well, and one thing that's fortunate is because I came up in the business the way that I did, which was, hands-on, actually doing the planting and installation and doing the maintenance, I got to actually see how things behave year over year. So, if you're a designer who has strictly learned from some design classes or, even on the job training, but really what you know of a plant and how it's going to behave is just what's on that tag or what's in your, horticopier or what have you, then you don't really have an understanding of what that plant is going to do or what it's also capable of doing with a little bit of nurturing. And so I think that's where that stereotype of landscape designers and landscape architects not really knowing their plant palette that well comes from, because they're seeing it on day one when it goes in, but they're not able to come back and see what that plant is actually trying to do 3 years from now or 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And maybe they're more concerned about other options, obviously, and that's where their expertise is, to be fair.
Nope, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely rare to find somebody that prioritizes, the whole package, the hardscape design and the plants and the lighting and everything else. It's just, I'm ADHD, so I'm fascinated by everything. And so that's just sort of been a natural outgrowth of that.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely relate to the ADHD tendencies.
Oh, for sure.
Yes. So for those homeowners, gardeners, or, DIY types who want to stay away from the 50 shades of beige, as you have put it, landscaped, what would be your first recommendation?
So my first recommendation for that would be to really seek out places where you can see plants used together in more interesting ways. So one thing that's great about the DC area is we just have some phenomenal public gardens all over the place. Even down as far south as, I've been to Maymont down in Richmond, which is great because it's got, more traditional gardens. It's got stuff that's a little bit more relaxed. It's got formal gardens. It's got a Japanese style garden. And so you can just really get out and see different types of plants. The other thing that I would say is check out some of the nurseries that have more interesting plants. Some of the larger garden centers in the area, they've got a really good selection, but some of them also kind of cater a little bit more towards, the landscape market, or, just kind of your standard, weekend, hey, we just have to pick up some plants to make the HOA happy. And that's not really where you're going to find the cool stuff. There's nurseries around that specialize in just really, really cool plant material. And that's, to me, that's a fun field trip, and go out there and explore and ask questions, because, if you have the opportunity to talk to a plant person and you ask them a question, 9 times out of 10, they'll talk your ear off. They're more than happy to share.
Very true. And so basically you're advocating what appeals to you personally is what you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's because that kind of dovetails into, sort of my whole idea behind what we're talking about, is just that it doesn't have to be what your neighbors have, and it doesn't have to be what you see rubber stamped on, the entire community. You can go out there and find something that just really, really excites you. If you think, hey, a Nucatensis cypress is really, really weird looking, but it's kind of cool and I want one, then do it. It's your yard. Have fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, some people do live under strict HOA regulations that I've seen, even some that have a prescribed plant list. How do we get around that, Dave?
So with the prescribed plant list ones, that's a little bit more of a challenge. I've only ever had one community where that was really an issue. And with that, we sort of pushed our boundaries a little bit and requested permission for introducing some other plants. And the thing is, a lot of these boards, so the community that I worked in that had those plant restrictions was one that was an HOA dating back to the 1950s. So I don't think anybody on the board actually understood why the plant palette was what it was. It was just what had rolled over from architectural review board to architectural review board. And so they were open to, as long as we could justify why we wanted to do it and provide pictures and documentation of what the plant was going to do, they were actually pretty open to it.
Wow, I can't imagine having the same plant list from 75 years ago today, with how many improvements and different introductions have been brought to the market.
Well, it's crazy because, we actually just did a project and it's a newer community, but they clearly just pulled their landscape design guidelines from what they had used on other communities that they managed. And it actually mandates that the front yard has to be 70% turf grass. And, I mean, that's just such an outdated notion in this time when people are, again, trying to reduce the amount of lawn space, increase the amount of plantings. It was just bizarre to me that in 2025, a new community had something like that.
That doesn't surprise me, Dave. So because of my book, Ground Cover Revolution, you got that little synergy between revolutions there. I do run into that a lot, that some of them even say it has to be all turf grass in the front. It's crazy.
No, absolutely. And there's just, again, it's a lack of imagination. And I really like pushing the boundaries and trying to get HOAs to, at least give me a reason why I can't do it. And the funny thing about HOA boards too, though, is we had one community where my homeowner wanted to do a European castle garden in their front yard in this extremely conservative HOA community. I mean, they were so restrictive that they actually got $100 fine because the post that they used for their mailbox wasn't properly chamfered. So, that's how crazy they were. And we actually managed to get a European castle garden in their front yard. And, it took a few meetings, but they actually came around to it. And so, you don't ask, you don't get, is really what it comes down to.
Well, I'm picturing a European castle garden, and my first thought is moat. Can you describe what that is in a little more detail?
So yeah, so we actually there's not a moat, but there's actually a faux marble fountain with a lion head,
Mm-hmm.
lion head fountain. We've got a 6 foot unicorn topiary that the homeowner located and purchased. We've got a bunch of ornamental ironwork. It was, again, just, and we used hardscape to sort of create a courtyard feel in the front yard. So it was very, very different from what the neighbors had.
Okay, I'm adding 6 foot topiary unicorn to my wish list because I think that sounds fantastic.
It is super cool. I'll have to send you a picture.
So, as somebody who works with realtors sometimes and talking about landscapes, if they heard that you had a 6 foot unicorn in the front yard, probably their advice would be that's the first thing you need to remove for resale. And what do you think about some of those realtors who say never do this type of thing in your landscape because it won't resell?
I think that if you buy the house and your theory is we're going to be in this house for 2 to 3 years and then we're going to move on, like, sure, at that point, focus on what's going to work for resale because you're only planning on being there for a couple of years. But anything beyond that, life is short. Make it all about you and what you find exciting. Had come across an article online that was written by a realtor that was basically never do these 10 things if you want to sell your house. And it really all came down to the outdoor equivalent of paint all your walls beige. And, again, if you're going to be in your house for any length of time, let it reflect your personality. I'm in dozens of homes every year. And when I walk through that front door, most of the time I get a very clear sense right off the bat of what that homeowner is into, what they value, what their style is, what kind of things get them excited. And then you go in their yard and it just looks like everybody else's yard. And there just seems to be this lack of understanding that people have that you can actually carry your personality into your landscaping. And it doesn't always have to be something absolutely crazy and wild, but you can still leave your stamp on your landscape and have what I think is a perfectly sellable home. But again, just have some fun with it.
I think a lot of people, it might be the resale that they're concerned with, but they're always more concerned probably with what will the neighbors think. So it's a peer pressure type thing.
It is, but it's, and maybe I say this as having always been the weird kid, but like, who cares what the neighbors think? Yeah, I mean, if you're designing around resale, then what you're doing is you're saying, I want to take my money that I worked really, really hard for, and I want to spend that money not on myself, but I want to spend it on somebody who I don't even know or who may not exist. And that to me is just kind of a self-defeating way of looking at it. And then as far as the neighbors, we've done projects in neighborhoods where, yeah, what we've done has completely gone outside of the quote unquote neighborhood aesthetic, but the neighbors see what we do. And then all of a sudden, we get calls from 2, 3, 4 of the other neighbors that want to do what we did.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, it's just, especially now that cable TV is kind of on a decline, people aren't just channel surfing and finding stuff on HGTV or stuff like that. The people that are into landscape and gardening and really care about it see a lot of what's out there, but a lot of the people just don't see what's possible. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what we try to do, is sort of open their eyes to what the possibilities are.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point that, if you go outside the box, you can actually influence what the surrounding yards and landscape might look like, that people use you as an example. And it's great to have that kind of forerunner, that little flag out in that neighborhood.
No, absolutely. And, because the thing is, I've done neighborhoods where, yeah, it's kind of your basic builder grade and nobody's really quite sure what to do. And so we find the homeowner that's willing to take that first step. And then all of a sudden, even if they don't work with us, even if they work with somebody else, you start seeing more interesting ideas, more unusual plantings in there. You start seeing the lawn getting reduced and more plantings put in. And people have a clearer understanding of just, what is possible and what they can do.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Getting back to what we were talking about for the resale value and what realtors will tell you, I was also thinking about the fact that I have never seen a successful garden conveyance, we'll call it. Every single person, whether it's a gardener buying an established garden, is usually going to rip out most of it and restart.
For sure. I mean, when we bought our house, everything came out. I mean, that was, and yeah, it's the same thing. You know, we're selling my mom's condo right now, and my brothers and I had the debate of, you know, do we redo the kitchen or do we sell it as is? And I was firmly in the camp of let's sell it as is, because whoever buys it is going to want to come in and put their own stamp on it. And it's sort of the same thing with the landscape. You know, one of the things that I get asked repeatedly is, you know, if we do this project, am I going to get my money back at resale? And I'm always honest, and I tell people I can't guarantee that. You know, there's certain things that you can do. Again, if you've got just a basic builder grade yard and you're making the landscape beds more interesting, putting in more interesting plants, as long as it's not something that looks like it's going to be maintenance intensive, you are going to make a more appealing prospect for the buyer. The second that you do something that looks like it's going to be a lot of work, that's when you start turning buyers off, unfortunately.
Well, I would say any Asian style garden, a rock garden, anything like that is going to be your highest maintenance type choice.
No, absolutely. And, you know, part of that is the education component, because, you know, we do a lot of really lush, natural kind of, you know, grow together, overlap sort of garden, which at the end of the day is extremely low maintenance, you know, minimal pruning, minimal shaping. By the time everything has kind of filled in, you know, we're reducing the amount of mulch, everything is out competing weeds. It's just an education of, you know, getting people to understand that, no, this may look like it's a lot of work, but it's actually way less work than just having a couple of 5-gallon plants plunked in a sea of mulch.
I think the hardest to, you know, probably for a resale would be a plant collection, like somebody who collects daylilies or say a cactus and succulent collection. You're not going to be able to find the buyer who wants to buy that collection.
No, the odds of finding something like that is extremely rare. I mean, we've got one customer, she has on her third of an acre property, she has, I want to say, 36 different species of cultivars of Japanese maples. And yeah, nobody else is going to see the value of that, but it's, you know, it's her collection. It makes her happy. She loves it. And, you know, that's what's really important.
And that's where plant rescues come in. I'm going to say a quick word for, like, you know, contacting the plant society for that plant or your local garden clubs and telling them come and dig before the sale, because it's all going to get, you know, bulldozed under probably.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and, you know, depending on the homeowner, that may even be something where they can have those conversations with those organizations in advance. I mean, we take care of an estate property here in Culpeper that the original house itself was built in 1739, and they have just this amazing historic peony garden in the back. And it's actually in the 1950s, 1960s, the president of the American Peony Society at that point had actually come out and done some work in the garden. So it's one that's kind of on their radar. So if they ever do sell the property and somebody comes in and says, hey, no, this isn't what we want, they've got a ready place that I think would be more than happy to come in and take some of what's there.
Yeah. The other, I guess, alternative I've seen sometimes, those properties get donated to a local park or other organization, or, the county or another government to maintain. Whether they actually maintain the collection well or not is another question for the future. Not always, well maintained after that, from what I've seen.
No, definitely. But, at least with this property, if that does happen, I will definitely be around and have opinions. So happy to share those.
Good for that. So I was looking at some of the more recent construction around the Beltway in the DC area. And a lot of it, of course, is, taking an old colonial brick style house and then doubling the size of it in the lot so that the landscape is pretty shrunk down because they're maximizing the house square footprint. What do you recommend for those type of landscapes, Dave?
On those, and it is such a challenge because, you'll see where all of a sudden it's gone to where we have whatever the minimum is that the county will allow from the house to the property lines. We've had, 6 feet from the house to the property line all of a sudden on the side yards, and then shallow front yards, shallow backyards. I think there's a couple things that we have to look at with that. So one is, and we found this to be an issue in Arlington, is because they still have a minimum tree canopy coverage requirement for a lot that size. They just put in just an insane amount of shade trees, and it's something that over time is just they're gonna crowd each other out. It's gonna create an issue. So one thing right off the bat is, if you're buying a house like that and you've had to satisfy the county, figuring out what of those trees you can possibly, for lack of a better word, rehome, find an opportunity to thin that out, and then do some smaller scale plants that will actually do the job that you need them to. The other thing with that kind of size restriction, where the house is just so dominant on the lot, is to not be afraid of scale. And what I mean by that is, people will be afraid of doing any kind of tree that gets any kind of height to it. They'll be afraid of doing larger shrubs. They'll be afraid of, but if you go to an older neighborhood, so the neighborhood that I'm in is, my house was built in 1906, and most of the homes in this neighborhood were built between 1900 and 1940. And if you look at what makes those older neighborhoods magical, like, what is it? It's the huge oak trees with the canopy that's just covering the neighborhood. It's, the big, beautiful shrubs. It's, everything well established. And I try to remind people that if you have that situation where you've got a large house on a not so large lot, one of the things that a larger plant is going to do for you is it's really going to create a connection between your house and the lot. So it doesn't just feel like it's this house sitting on this open postage stamp, that it's actually something that is part of the landscape.
Yeah, I think sometimes they look like they're just kind of plopped there and there's not much around them at all to frame those larger houses.
No, absolutely. And, we do a fair number of, especially the more contemporary style homes, and really getting people to embrace the idea of doing something that will get some height. Whether it's, fastigiate horn beams or something like that, just, let's do something that offsets the verticality of the house, and that makes a big difference.
So what are some subtle ways to leave a stamp on the property?
So one of the easiest ways is, if we're gonna look at sort of the overall landscape, there's so much that you can do with the hardscape. And I'm not even talking about doing large over the top hardscaping or anything else like that, but just even simple, details that you can work into the paving. We have one customer where when the Capitol was renovated, he managed to salvage some pieces of marble from the facade. And so we actually integrated those into the front walk. We've done projects where one of my clients, when her family farm in Connecticut was sold off, she actually packed as much of the stone from the farm into the trunk of her car as she could carry back to Virginia. And we actually integrated that into a column as part of her driveway. So she always had a piece of her old family home at her place in Virginia. So with the hardscape, there's a lot that you can do with your person, to imprint your own stamp on that. As far as the plantings go, again, it's just really finding what it is that you find exciting, like what kind of plants really appeal to you. Some people want to see just blooms as much of the season as possible. Some people want to, some people are a little bit more reserved and they just want to see something that is, very elegant and very simple. It can be, evergreens and just white blooms. And so it's really kind of figuring out what your personal style is and how that translates into the landscape and how you can sort of orient your entire landscape around that.
I also think there's a big variation in how tolerant people are of, informal, loose, we'll call it messy looks.
Absolutely.
To a very formal, everything trimmed back, nothing outside the edges or touching you type landscapes.
Yeah, and what I try to do with folks like that is really encourage them. I'll show them, pictures of some of the work that we've done, but then also pictures of some of the work that, brilliant plant designers like Pete Adolf have done, where you still have your very, very structural evergreens, but surrounded by more big, broad brushstrokes of evergreens, of perennials and grasses and that sort of thing. Again, I find that most people don't know what they don't know when it comes to the landscape. And so as soon as we start introducing them to concepts, we can say, okay, I see what's important to you. And I understand what your reservations are, but what about this? And then that's when they start to come around to it and really, open their eyes to what they can do and really make it their own.
And earlier you had talked about visiting our local public gardens for inspiration. Do you find a lot of people are going online now onto Pinterest and other sites to source for landscape ideas?
They are. And, the one issue that I have with Pinterest now is we're seeing more and more AI slop on there.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it a little bit of a challenge as a designer. If somebody comes to me with something where I look at it, I'm just kind of like, okay, that's clearly AI. And, we really can't do that because that's not something that could exist in real life. But even with that, there's still so many resources online. I still have customers that share Pinterest boards with me. I have customers that share Howe's idea books. I've got customers. I have, one client, she actually did a 53-page PowerPoint presentation of everything that she liked. So there is, really curating things that they like is important because what I tell people is go online and, I'll give you a couple search parameters that you can look for and get as many pictures. And I don't need notes on them. I don't need, if you want to share your thoughts with it, that's fantastic. But if you just want to give me a dump of, 20, 30 photos, my job as a designer is to look at them and kind of think, okay, what is it that is sort of a consistent theme across all of these? What is it that sort of ties all these ideas together? And that gives me an idea into what that person finds appealing.
I think for a lot of people that could help them narrow things down because, we all want it all, right? I want a Japanese style garden, but I also want a wading pool and a formal rose garden and a cottage garden and a cutting garden and a vegetable garden. So yeah, it's hard to narrow that down.
No, absolutely. And, living in a house with a small yard, it's kind of like living on a boat where you've got to have stacked functions as much as possible. And, sometimes we're able to do that. Sometimes, unfortunately, I have to be the voice of reason and say, no, you know what, I would love to do that, but that's just not feasible in the space that we have.
And we were talking earlier about gardening over time. I think obviously gardeners evolved themselves to what they want and need. Say if they have kids now, they might want to reserve some turf grass for that and a little play set. But then in 10 or 15 years, they can remove that and do something else. So maybe you're looking at phasing in things and phasing out other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we talk to our homeowners about is just, absolutely. If you want to have a big soccer space right now, or you want to have room for that play set, we can absolutely do that. But let's talk about what's going to happen when the kids age out of that. And, a lot of times people aren't really, everybody's busy. So a lot of times people aren't thinking past that 5-year point where, the kids aren't going to want to play on the swings anymore. So what do we do with that space? And so we try to have a plan for that as well.
And I think, just if you're a DIY type person and you're thinking about your own landscape, just doing a little at a time or just biting off one project at a time is a good idea.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to have, whether you hire somebody or whether you do it yourself, have some sort of a plan for what you want it to look like at the end, to have that roadmap. Because if you've got an overarching master plan and vision of what you want everything to look like, then you can say, yeah, you know what, I've got X amount set aside right now, and I've got this much free time that I can spend doing this corner of the property. And if you've got that master plan in mind, then you can still do those little discrete chunks. But then as everything starts to get implemented, it all still ties together and it doesn't look like you just did it a chunk at a time.
And we brought up AI a little bit earlier, so we should, address the elephant in the room, and that people are going on to sites like ChatGPT and using them to be their landscape designer. What do you think about that?
I'm not a huge fan for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, strictly from an artistic standpoint, AI is pattern recognition software. So what it's doing is it's looking at it and it's saying, okay, this is, I see this set of parameters and I can pull from all these various images of similar things and create sort of a mix up of things that would appear to work across that. And that's not really what design is. Design is figuring out exactly what it is that's important to you as the end user and going from there. The other issue with it is just that it doesn't take into account issues like topography and drainage and sun exposure and microclimates and everything else that it really kind of takes a person to understand. I mean, maybe at some point that'll be something that AI can do, but it's certainly not there. And, I've had customers come to me that, they thought they were sort of speeding the process up by having AI come up with some concepts. And, you have to say, look, that's kind of neat. And that gives me an idea of what you're thinking. But, that as it is, like, I can't work with that. That's just not going to work with the realities of your site.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of AI in general at this point, but for garden design in particular, if you're not standing in the space, I just don't know how you can design for it. I can see its use, say, for layout of a vegetable plot and going season to season transition. I could see using a computer program for that. I don't see that, really being a problem solver, as you said, for a landscape that's in 4 dimensions.
Yeah, we did so I just recently did a design for a customer where they had just bought the adjacent property next to their house, and it was, it's a wooded lot, and they were looking to do sort of a strolling garden through a woodland garden, which is a really, really cool thing. And they had initially asked ChatGPT to, design it for them. And yeah, it was, first of all, the plant palette was incredibly limited and not particularly interesting, but they even had it drilled down to where it was recommending spacing and stuff like that. And it's just, not at all how we would do it. So I just feel like it's a little bit, I just don't think it's something that should be relied on for especially that level of execution.
And, eventually it can improve. We have to keep an open mind on that. But as you say, I just don't think with the prescriptive way that it designs things, it's not going to be helpful for most people.
No, because you need to know enough that you can look at it and be able to understand, okay, this is where it's falling short. This is where it's hallucinating the right answer for it. And that's something that, yeah, it's just not there. I hate to see people, devote resources to something that is ultimately going to be unsuccessful.
So you probably have a lot of influences, but I'll put you on the spot, Dave, and ask you for some of your horticultural heroes.
So Pete Adolf is obviously one of my big ones. I just love what he does with, again, just perennials and grasses, large washes of that. Honestly, I pull my influences from all different aspects of art and design. To narrow it down to just a handful is really hard. This is going to sound crazy, but I'm actually a huge Project Runway fan, and I've gotten influences from seeing the different designs that they do and how they think about form and style. And so yeah, that's honestly been huge for me. Jeffrey Mack is a fashion designer that I think is phenomenal, and he's definitely been an influence in my thinking, especially in the last couple of months.
And how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
So my website is revolutionarygardens.com, and that's the best way to find me. I'm on Facebook for Revolutionary Gardens, and then my Instagram is actually at ranunculus_Jones. That's actually sort of a side project that I've been working on, and that's how to find me on Instagram.
Okay, you have to tell us about this side project.
So the side project it sort of stemmed from a little bit of creative burnout. So the idea behind Ranunculus Jones is a focus on architectural oddities and botanical curiosities. And I love architectural salvage. I love repurposing items. And so the idea behind Ranunculus Jones, as crazy as it sounds, is I created a fictional character named Ranunculus Jones, who is my partner in that endeavor, and we work together to find and design just really cool random things.
Yeah, I'm looking at that, and I follow you on Instagram at that account now. And I think salvage and reuse is one of my big passions too. I love to see things repurposed in a totally different way in the landscape. And also, haunting those architectural resale places where they tear down a property and then you might be able to source something to use in your landscape.
Oh, absolutely. I was at a nursery outside of Baltimore several years ago, and they had a couple pallets of granite that came out of a church that was demolished in Baltimore. And I just had to have them, and I actually integrated them into a number of different projects just because, if you've got it available to you, why the heck not?
And I think that's a great way to end this episode on personalizing your landscape, because you can use some of those elements, like you talked about the lady who brought stone from her home garden to her new home garden, and other influences and pieces, could be a piece of art, could be just, a rock.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, there's so many opportunities for found items that are really cool. There was an artist out that I saw a lot of his work out in, especially Western Fauquier County, where he was repurposing old cutoffs from plasma cutting manufacturing, and just these big hunks of steel that just looked really, really cool. And you set them in a garden and it just completely sets it off.
And I think those are some of the most memorable gardens.
Absolutely. It's, again, find something that find something that moves you and integrate it in the garden. And that's a great way to go with it.
Thank you, Dave.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Virginia Sweetspire Plant Profile. Virginia Sweetspire, Itea virginica, is a deciduous shrub that is native to the eastern United States. It is also known as Virginia willow. It grows into a small mound that is 2 to 5 feet tall and wide. It is hardy to USDA zones 5 to 9. In the spring, it produces cascading branches of fragrant white flowers that attract butterflies and bees. In the fall, the leaves turn to beautiful shades of red and orange. The seeds are eaten by songbirds. It prefers to grow in part to full sun in moist but well-draining acidic soils. It can spread into a dense thicket via root suckers. You can propagate it by seed, taking cuttings in the spring, and root division. Virginia Sweetspire is deer-resistant and can tolerate occasional flooding. Selected cultivars include Henry's Garnet, Little Henry, and Fizzy Mizzy. Virginia Sweetspire. You can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I'm enjoying the fall color of my tiger's eyes staghorn sumac. Just brilliant at this time of year. Over at the community garden plot, we are still harvesting peppers and cowpeas. In garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we talked all about pumpkins, including how to stop squirrels and other rodents from chewing up your pumpkins by coating them with a hot pepper wax spray or spraying them with a deer or rabbit repellent. In local gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. region, on Thursday, November 6th, there is a holiday floral design event hosted by District 3 of the National Capital Area Garden Clubs from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. at the Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church in Fairfax, Virginia. Tickets are required. You can find out more at ncagardenclubs.org/District3. Ecological historian Michael Gage, a past guest on GardenDC, is giving 2 historic tree talks at Oak Hill Cemetery in Washington, D.C. on Sunday, November 9th. Enjoy the fall colors while learning about the cemetery's oldest trees. The walking tour and seated lecture in the chapel are offered on that morning and early afternoon. To register for either, go to oakhillcemeterydc.org. And then on Thursday, November 13th at 7 p.m., hosted by the American Horticultural Society, is a talk by Jeff Lowenfils, Soil Health with Bacteria. That's all about the partnership between mycorrhizal fungi and plants. It is offered virtually. There is a fee and registration is required. Go to ahsgardening.org to sign up. Finally, join me on Saturday, November 22nd for seasonal holiday plants and a bulb forcing demo at 1 p.m. at Green Spring Gardens in Annandale, Virginia. And we will be sharing tips on nurturing your holiday favorites, introducing a few unique plant varieties for thoughtful gifts, and then learning all about the basics of bulb forcing. There is a $43 per person fee that includes your supplies in the class, and that is through fairfaxcounty.gov/parks/park takes, or call Green Spring Gardens at 703-642-5173. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Green Prints with the last word on The Carrot Waltz by Fiona M. Jones. It has always been a mystery to me. How do farmers manage to grow carrots that are perfectly straight, single-rooted, and almost uniform in shape and size, when carrots, given the choice, would much rather do something else? Left to their own devices, they would waggle and blob, stubby themselves into doubles, or sprout arms and legs like tiny mandrakes. They'd rather tangle and twist, making themselves difficult to harvest and even trickier to peel. It wasn't their idea to be farmed, after all. If they had their way, they'd stay hidden in the soil, dancing an unseen, rebellious waltz beneath the earth. My sister, newly settled in a quaint countryside cottage, decided to take up gardening. Brimming with enthusiasm and armed with all the horticultural wisdom gleaned from a few online articles, she set out to grow her own carrots. She broke up a neglected patch of lawn, tilled the soil as best she could, and lovingly planted the seedlings she had started on her sunny front porch. The birds feasted, the slugs joined in, but against all odds, the delicate, feathery leafage persisted. Every weekend, she battled weeds and pests, tending to her little plot with hopeful determination. By late summer, her patience bore fruit, or rather, vegetables. As a doting aunt, she saved the best of her harvest for my 2 little sons. They were ecstatic. "Mr. Carrot dancing," they squealed, holding up a particularly animated specimen. It stood with twisted limbs outstretched, its wild, punky fronds flaring like a tiny vegetable rock star. Inspired, the boys tried to mimic its pose, giggling as they struck dramatic carrot-like stances. Someone must have taken a picture before it shriveled away, but memories are easier to summon than old photos. To this day, my children still remember the star of that harvest and the name they gave it, Mr. Carrot Dancing. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at greenprints.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Gents, with editing assistance from intern Cavett Ireland. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 207, Garden Planning and Design, Episode 158, Garden Transformations, Episode 89, Working with a Landscape Designer, Episode 149, Garden Design for Plant Collectors. By the way, you can become a listener supporter. Find that link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too.